welcome to another recording of the African Technology Authors and Speakers Forum. Our aim here is to equip aspiring speakers and writers in the African context to kind of man up, if you would, to start writing more, start speaking more. We need so much more when it comes to African representation in the articles that's out there in the technology space, but also in conferences. And hopefully, through the little bit that we share here, it'll equip people to learn the things that many of us wish we knew 20 years or so ago, to get going. Your voice counts. What you write counts. What you speak about counts. And I'm so very happy today to have our guest, Kim Harrisberg, on the recording. I've collaborated with her a number of times. She is amazing. I follow her work, and so do I encourage you to do, and I'll definitely put her LinkedIn and her profile on the recording. Kim is a correspondent with the Thomson Reuters Foundation. They publish their articles on Context. Those links will be in the recording as well. It is a charitable arm of Thomson Reuters working to advance media freedom, foster inclusive economies, and promote human rights through journalism, legal assistance, and other initiatives. They are doing great work. And if you're an African or a South African, follow the articles. They make these short, amazing, documentaries. I think, Kim, you did one on Uber drivers in South Africa, which we can touch on. Kim reports primarily on how technology, climate change, and equality impacts people's lives in Southern Africa. Close to my heart. Kim, super happy to have you here. How are you doing? And tell us more about you that I haven't covered in my second-hand way already.
Thank you so much, Johan. It's so nice to just be here today with you. As you mentioned, I've interviewed you a lot in the past, sometimes on a very tight deadline. So I'm grateful for your input and that we've kept up this relationship, and that I can also contribute in some shape or form to this forum that you've created and connecting people across the continent, but also around the world who are interested in what's happening in Africa. And there's a lot going on. So yeah, I'm really, really chuffed to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Sure, yeah. Often the real things that's happening here in our continent are drowned out by all the, let's call it global north news media. It's important, but I'm so tired of reading about Trump and others. There's like stuff happening here that's impacting us and the future of our children. So I think you and the organization are doing such amazing work. I want to kick off by asking you, are writers born or made? In other words, is it just pure talent? Some people might have it. Or do we learn as we go? What was your journey to get into writing as a profession?
I think both. I think writers can be born or made. I always loved writing and reading, but I have memories of writing like long essays and poems and things like that growing up, and always submitting them for competitions, and just really enjoying writing and being encouraged by the feedback I got from my writing. But I think I wanted to be so many things. I wanted to be a vet. I wanted to be a physio. I wanted to travel the world. And I think I settled on journalism because many aspects of the job allow you to do so many things. And with every person that you interview, you get a glimpse into a different world. And so I was like, okay, this is good for my fickle mind, that wants to do a bit of everything. And I can combine reading and writing and communicating with people. And journalism has taken me to many places around the world, but, also during the pandemic when we couldn't travel as much, just being able to interview people online and connect with people via the phone or however it is, it kind of gives you a glimpse into another world, which is what I love about journalism. So I think I've always loved writing, but I think also just where life took me, the people I've met, the mentors I've had that opened doors for me or guided me, encouraged me, and also just some luck, like the right job at the right time. There's some brilliant writers out there who cannot find work. It's not because they're not talented. It's because it's a really flooded market and, not many opportunities out there, unfortunately. So I think it's a combination of all of that, a bit of luck, passion, mentorship, and all of that kind of mixed into one.
Just for our viewers, so Kim is speaking to us today in her personal capacity, but as I've said, she does work with the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Tell us briefly about the foundation. I've said a little bit, but I mean, you guys are doing incredible work, Kim. And why? I mean, you guys are worth following. It's Thomson Reuters, it's the foundation, it's the Africa Impact lens. Why should people in this continent read and follow what you guys are doing?
Yeah, thank you for that, Johan. I really appreciate that. I mean, in many ways, it is my dream job because I get to report on human stories, but that are connected to, global politics and economics and a whole bunch of social issues. But we have a global reach. We've got journalists around the world from Mexico to, Brussels and the Philippines, Kenya, Nigeria. We all over the world. We're a small newsroom, but we always cover how these stories impact ordinary human beings. And I think our main focus areas have changed over the years. I was originally hired to be a water correspondent, and I was just covering water rights in South Africa, and there was a lot to report on at the time, and there still is a lot to report on with regards to water. My role then shifted more to property rights, then technology, and now a bigger focus on climate change. Still covering technology and inequality, which we think there's many big issues of our time, but these are some of them. And I think what we try to do is communicate our stories in a way that's universal, that anyone would be able to grapple with, connect with. We also want people not to feel depressed or disempowered after reading or watching some of our stories, but we hope that there's maybe a takeaway of people that are looking for solutions, that are innovating, just spotlighting some incredible work around the world. Of course, that's not the only thing we do. Sometimes a story just needs to be told as a story without, this element of maybe sunshine journalism or solutions journalism attached to it. But I think there are a lot of stories that aren't being told about people doing amazing things. And I think the world right now can be very depressing. As a journalist, I find the news very depressing. I often say to my husband, if I wasn't a journalist, I wouldn't open social media. I wouldn't read any news articles, but it is part of my job to figure out how to tell these stories in a different way. And I think, there's a lot to be uncovered on this continent and all around the world. And I think that's something we're trying to do is find our place on the internet, which is a very crowded place, but to tell these stories from the human perspective, that are sometimes solutions focused, and those stories do exist. And I think it's really important for us to realize how interconnected all these stories are around the world. And that's one of our strengths, is that we have journalists in all these countries and we feed into one another's stories. I know we don't only want to talk about Trump, but for example, these aid cuts, we can report about what's happening in countries all over the world, and we can do it in a couple of days or hours because we have those feet on the ground and we can see how interconnected the world is, especially with technology. Your main focus. Of course, technology connects the entire world, whether it's the content moderators in Kenya, the AI end users, in the US, wherever it is, these lines can be drawn. And more than ever before, it's important to show how, opening up a chatbot in one country might be powered by workers who've been moderating that content to create that chatbot in another country. And what are those human rights issues? Are there abuses going on? Are there positive stories to tell? I think that's one of our biggest strengths, is just that interconnectedness, in telling those human stories around the world.
Those human stories are important. I'm reminded of Trevor Noah presenting at the White House Correspondent's dinner a few years ago. Obviously super funny, but at the end, he had this rallying call to journalists saying, we depend on you guys to tell us the truth. And I know some publications are right-leaning, some are left-leaning. We live in what some people call a post-truth world. Can you even believe anything you're reading? And the stuff coming out of the current administration in Washington leaves me aghast. That's a whole other conversation. But we need journalists on the ground telling what's happening, holding truth to power. I think one of the key elements and really foundational aspects of a true democracy is journalists who can speak freely, even if the leaders don't like it. So it's a very daunting career. It's obviously satisfying, I would like to think, but man, I don't think any of our listeners should ever underestimate how important journalists are, especially when you tackle those issues that leaders don't want you to speak about, Kim. So yeah, kudos to you and your team. I want to ask you about writing. I think people have different rhythms and habits. Some write in the morning, some in the evening, some in coffee shops. And being a journalist and traveling, you probably write on planes and trains and who knows what. But how did you find your rhythm? Is there a time and a place and a way where you are a lot more creative than in other places? What works for you, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, I think the answer will be so different, for every writer out there. I think for me, definitely a simmering sense of panic definitely gets me writing, whether it's a deadline approaching or, a news event that has happened that kind of forces me to write something a lot faster than I would. But I think what I've also made peace with, and there's an amazing book for any aspiring writers that I would recommend. It's called Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, who's an American author, and she writes about writing and about how painful it can sometimes be because there's a story you have to tell, but sometimes it just doesn't want to come out. And she writes about, even the failed drafts and like the hours just staring at the computer screen thinking you're not doing anything. That's actually part of the writing process because, the story's kind of being formulated in your mind. Even if you think it's not. And sometimes the procrastination is part of that too. For me, it is, because it does sometimes take that panic. Oh my gosh, I got to write this piece down, and suddenly it will all come out. And when you try and force it, it can be quite a painful experience. So I think, trusting your process, whatever it is. Some people write better in the morning. I'm usually like the last few hours of the day once that panic sets in, and it really does help me. And that's how I kind of got through school and university, was like everything last minute, everything the night before, and it just kind of worked for me. So I stuck with it. But I think, there is some structure, of course, to my journalistic reporting, which is, going through my transcripts and my recordings, which AI helps a lot with. If we're speaking about technology, it has simplified the work of journalists quite a bit in terms of transcriptions and saving us a lot of time. But to always have backups is also something that I've learned the hard way. So I think, using that technology to streamline your process, going through finding the best quotes, figuring out how you're going to structure a story. And I think everyone has their own rhythm and their own routine, and you have to just figure out what works best for you.
It's a process of experimentation. Work best in the mornings, 4 to 6. I mean, my wife thinks I'm a freak, but I also like the fact that she's bothering me during that time. I go sit up with my coffee and I do my best work then. A lot of people, and I guess it depends on biorhythms as well, a lot of people work best at night, like you do, Kim. Ask about, especially for aspiring speakers, people who are not professional speakers earning the income from it, but they feel they have a voice, they want to say something, whether it's a blog, something on LinkedIn, but that daunting demon in the background, I don't have a voice, I have nothing to say, what if I'm being criticized? What I have picked up with a lot of African women in particular who I've been speaking with recently is, and it's not just them, but it's the culture you grew up in, that women should be seen and not heard. You don't have a voice, you should not speak up. They end up in this corporate world where they make great success of themselves. They learn so much that they can share, but that demon from the upbringing is still in their background. Whether it's African women or any of us, that feeling of, what if people laugh at me? What if people think I'm making mistakes? That self-doubt. Do you have any tips? Because you must have been dealing with that over the years, probably still, I'm not sure. Anything you can share that'll help people?
Yeah, I think when I learned the term imposter syndrome, I was like, oh, okay, there's a word for this, and a lot of people I spoke to felt similarly. They just maybe didn't express it as often, or it would manifest in different ways, like narcissism or insecurities. But I think a lot of people experience it, men and women, men in different ways, manifest in different ways. But I think, I think it's important to speak about it and to find support amongst other writers. And I think, the internet, there's some amazing things on the internet, but there's also a lot of trolls and some terrible things that we have to mute and block out and not engage with, as hard as that can be. And I think, yeah, of course, there's so many people on the internet right now who want to say something, and I think it's important to figure out, what is it that you want to say? What is it that you want to add to? Is it something that's authentic and that is well researched, and that is contributing to a conversation? I think that's great. I don't know if I have the energy or the courage to launch something new in my own name and put myself out there on the internet. I think, some of these influencers, they're either crazy or really brave for doing what they do, but you have to have a thick skin for it. But I think it's just important to figure out what it is that you want to say, and to back yourself. There are people out there who will want to hear what you have to say, who will support you. It's about finding those mentors. And a lot, I say to some fellow writers, like, a lot of people opened doors for me, and I'm trying to keep those doors open for other people, because that is what has helped me in my career. And I think, sometimes the people that aren't the loudest, aren't the pushiest, they sometimes the more grounded people who actually have a lot of important things to contribute. So it's about keeping that door open and saying, like, actually, come on in. We want to hear what you have to say, whether it's, freelancers that I'm working with or younger journalists. But I really think that's an important thing, is to, just to back yourself and, share the opportunities that you may be given with others who you think really do have something to say and something to contribute.
It's about paying it forward, and to be blessed with the opportunities we have received, and to help others. Some of the things I've picked up there, Kim: focus. Don't write about everything in the world. Don't lash out. I mean, I see some social media posts where I think, and that stuff never goes away, even if you delete it. One day when you run for president, somebody's going to dig it up from Reuters. So let's, just before we end off, to chat GPT or not. Because, I mean, I use it a lot in my writing. It doesn't replace my voice. It helps me with planning. It helps me with maybe rephrasing something. I even find that a lot of these plagiarism checkers are fairly inaccurate. But as a professional journalist that's being paid for your work, and obviously, there are some stringent measures in obviously evaluating your posts and your submissions. To what extent do you use generative AI and large language models? What are the pros and the cons for you?
I think we can't ignore it. I think we ignore it at our own peril as writers or in any profession. But I am very tentative to throw myself into it. So I'll sometimes use it now and then for research. I actually much prefer Perplexity AI, which kind of shows you how it's sourcing information and is always kind of referencing, footnoting. I find just the references to sources a lot more comforting. And you can guide that through saying, like, only using reputable sources. And I'm sure ChatGPT can do that too. I just, for some reason, can't bring myself to engage with it that much. But I did, at one point I said, let me see how useful this can be to me as a journalist. And I asked it a couple of questions, and I said, provide sources for everything. And then I went one by one and clicked on the links that had come up. I think it was ChatGPT. And like, 90% of the links were broken. And it freaked me out, because I was like, as a journalist, I have a responsibility to communicate facts to people. If I was feeling lazy and just pasted in those links and said, according to this, and it all looked reputable on the surface, it was referencing, government sources and, decent websites. But when the link took me through, the links no longer existed. So I think that it's critical, if you are creating information, to never fully trust generative AI and what it is telling you. We've heard cases of lawyers who have cited legal references, legal cases that don't exist, which can be humiliating, career-ending stuff. There's so much misinformation out there. I think we can't underestimate the importance of human fact-checking, being the ones to find those sources, those statistics, and then of course just being on the ground, interviewing people face to face, and being the eyes and the ears that so far generative AI cannot be just yet. I think now more than ever, it's hugely important to ensure we are conveying truth, or as close to truth as we can get, and just to be really, really careful with how we integrate AI into our daily lives.
You're so right, Kim. Look, it definitely can help. I agree with you. So Perplexity is my go-to. I use ChatGPT now and then, but even with Perplexity, I find about 10% of the references are not working. And even working, I still click on the link. I go read the article. And now and then the link doesn't really reflect what I thought it would. So the point, I think, is it doesn't take away the hard work. It helps you find sources quickly, but put yourself on the chair, put in the work, and then what you said here toward the end is that element of face-to-face, hearing a story from a poor person, hearing stories from women who are victims of gender-based violence, children living in poverty, or that you can't chat GPT. That is, and it's a huge responsibility, because that child whose voice no one will ever hear, they are essentially putting what their story is in your hands to translate and put into the publication. So it is almost a sacred calling in a way. But Kim, in the short time, you've shared so much, a lot of food for thought. I think the point is we all can write. It takes exercise. It takes practice. You mentioned mentors. Reach out to people who can help you. And use ChatGPT. It won't replace your voice. And tell stories. We have been doing it for thousands of years, around fires at night. I want to hear your story. I want to learn from your story. So, Kim, firstly, thank you for your time, but also to you and your team at the foundation. You are doing exceptionally important work in a world where we can barely trust journalists anymore. So I want to encourage you. We are going to follow you and the team, and I thank you for your time, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johan, and thank you for spotlighting our continent and the amazing work that people are doing here.